Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to have you here for this fantastic next installment of our WSR Speaks. Today we'll be speaking with Dr. Rita Sherma, and I will introduce her in just a moment. But first, I want to introduce the WSR program in case you are not familiar with it. So the Women's Studies and Religion Certificate Program is a certificate program of the Dean's Office of the Graduate Theological Union. I'm going to put in the chat our website, so you can find it very easily with gtu.edu/WSR. I'm also going to put in the chat our other upcoming spring events. We have a really great lineup for this spring. So the WSR certificate program is a certificate program that's open to all GTU students that are in enrolled member schools, as well as the master's and doctoral program. You take the GTU seminar, which is being offered this semester and is offered every year, and then 3 additional courses, and then you attend what comes out to be about 3 events. So for co-curricular education units. So this event is worth 2 units. And if you are part of this certificate program, there is a colloquium, event colloquium form on our website. And so you would just do a write-up of this event, and that's 2 of your 3 events done for your certificate. If you have any questions about the program, feel free to email the wsr@ses.gtu.edu. All right, so I am very pleased to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Rita Sherma, who is the director of the GTU Center for Dharma Studies, the department co-chair for Theology and Ethics, and a core doctoral faculty member at the GTU. She's published 8 books, including a recent volume called Religion and Sustainability, Interreligious Resources, Interdisciplinary Responses in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals series. We are so excited about learning from you today. And I'm going to begin with our first question that we ask each guest in the WSR Speaks series. So we'd like to hear your thoughts on the continued importance of women's studies in religion more broadly in this particular time, with a heightened polarity in political and cultural discourse, systemic racism, the rise of prominent external white supremacy, pandemic, global warming, etc., from your experience as a scholar. Oh, you are muted.
Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm delighted to be here. If we think about WSR, there's really a wonderful recent volume edited by Helen Boursier that explains how WSR, Women's Studies and Religion, needs to be reconfigured for our time. It talks about interreligious and multicultural perspectives on women's studies and religion in conversation with particular gender-based, justice-rooted contexts with, and the diverse cultural, social, religious, sexual orientation grounds from where these voices rise. So in addition, we also need to consider the colonial legacies affecting women of the global South and its specific impacts on their lives and the lives of their children. And today, we have to consider the interdisciplinary range of women's studies in religion that has moved far beyond religious studies to include insights from law, public policies, sociology, psychology, ethics, economics, just for example. So when I was in graduate school, WSR moved around the central core of Christian women's experiences and just began to include Jewish feminist voices like Judith Plasko and others. And also feminist theology and feminist theoethics had come up. But today we must look at women's concerns and struggles and the experiences of oppression beyond women's bodies to other oppressed bodies in a diverse spectrum of traditions and in an interreligious way. We need to also include other indigenous and Buddhist, Asian, Trans-Pacific, Jain, Muslim, Hindu, and earth-based religions as well, just talking about religion. So interdisciplinary has to be interreligious, and also to remain contemporary and relevant. We are moving from theory to practical application in challenging just a broad range of systemic injustices regarding sexual violence, the Me Too movement, femicide, feminicide. Further, we have to look at statistics. Murder of Asian women over the course of the past year has gotten a lot of attention, but Indigenous women are kidnapped and murdered and never found in numbers that would shake your soul. So the advocacy and responses of our current justice seekers, like BLM women leaders to violence, and Indigenous women leaders to colonial domination and violations of unceded Indigenous terrain, are just two examples of the complex intersectionality of women's studies and religion today. And so when I think about this globally, I think of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, of which number 5 is, I'm quoting from, I remember this, I just wrote about it. Number 5 is to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls, unquote. So there is still plenty of work to be done under women's studies and religion. The UN Secretary General is on record as speaking to the importance of faith-based organizations in the realization of that Sustainable Development Goals, SDG number 5, which I just spoke about. And why, the other thing to remember is that I'm an ecological feminist and eco-theologian, and I keep thinking about this, that while environmental changes affect everyone, due to already existing gender inequalities, women often bear the bulk of the burden. In patriarchal societies, cultural, legal, political restrictions often undermine natal women's adaptability and resilience to climate change. And of course, in those same places, transgender women are likely to be not just oppressed, but murdered. When cyclones, floods, droughts, and extreme heat rip through social fabric, worldwide, communities need all hands on deck to deal with these repercussions, but lack of access to credit and to land and to patrimony makes it difficult, especially hard for women to bounce back from that ongoing disaster that we're facing. So the effects of climate change don't present themselves as emergencies that grab our attention on every day on the evening news, but they're rather a kind of slow, continuous change to terrains and to livelihood that most severely impact women and girls, first in many of our minority communities, as well as the global south.
Thank you so much. I realized that I failed to also say that you are the co-chair of Sustainability 360 and a member of the Women's Studies and Religion Steering Committee, so we thank you for that. I also didn't introduce myself. I'm Dr. Ashley Bacci, and I'm the current faculty chair of the WSR program. And again, we're so excited for this conversation. I think that first question, the way that you answered that, dovetails right into our second question, which is if you could talk to us about ecological feminism today.
Yes, ecological feminism or ecofeminism, the philosophy at the intersection, basically, of environmentalism and feminism, maintains kind of as a foundational premise that the exploitation of women and that of nature are connected. This was its origins, the historical origins. This is no mere theoretical position, though, but a very clear and tangible reality that um, our foremothers in this area have made clear that there exist important links between the modernist project of development and the subjugation of women and the ravaging of nature. It comes from the French feminist author Françoise Daubogne, who in 1994 introduced the term ecofeminism in her book Le Féminisme ou la Mort, Feminism or Death, which asserted basically that there's a connection between the oppression of both women and nature, and that such subjugation is linked to patriarchal power. Feminist theologies this first wave of ecofeminism identified the religious concepts that supported or encouraged oppression of others deemed inferior. So they identified in various religious traditions, and I'm one of those people who did that for mine, those particular principles, insights, or doctrines that supported oppression of women or anyone else as inferior, because this is problematic, because once we begin to do that, the ability to transfer that sense of the suppressed versus the suppressor continues into the world of the more than human world. In New Woman, New Earth, my mentor, Rosemary Ruther, critiqued patriarchal attitudes towards nature and charted basically the theological developments in history, which gave rise to a conflation and devaluation of nature, embodiment, and the feminine. So this is linked, nature, embodiment, and the feminine. And it's not linked in every tradition, but more on that later. On this initial critique, you have the second wave of ecofeminist theologians like Sally McFay, Catherine Keller, and others, who went on to develop constructive theologies and theoethics informed by ecological feminist philosophy. Now, according to Greta Gard, a very major voice in ecofeminism who's still alive today, ecofeminism asserts, I'm quoting her, the ideology which authorizes oppression based on race, class, gender, sexuality, physical abilities, and species is the same ideology that sanctions the oppression of nature. So this is I remember the quote because it's from one of my publications on this subject. And as we face the climate crisis, gender, women, and sexuality studies scholars can access critical tools via cultivating the theory and practice of ecological feminism through dialogue with Asian and indigenous ecofeminisms, eco-womanism, earth-based knowledge systems. In epistemic humility, ecofeminism can identify and has challenged the structures that give rise to climate crisis, the sixth mass extinction, and the societal disrepair and dysfunction that we face today. But it also has identified and critiqued the very real idea of disposability. And this is it's a horrific thing, but it's not a theory, it's an observation they have made, that the concept that sentient beings, landscapes, ancient terrains, and the earth itself can literally be discarded. Ecological feminism teaches us that our own liberation our own emancipation is intertwined with the emancipation of all other oppressed beings and of the oppressed ecosphere. So it has moved beyond the woman-nature link to a much wider slate of concerns that when you begin to commit conceptual violence, it leads to verbal violence, which leads to active violence that is in terms of not just behavior, but policies and systems and structures. And so we have to understand that all oppressions are interconnected. And that really is the gift of ecological feminism.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As a follow-up to that, I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your forthcoming book, that Religion and Sustainability book. I think that our audience would be interested in hearing a little bit more about that project.
Can I screen share for a second?
Yes, I think that you can.
So let me get the book first out.
And I'm just going to put the title in the chat for those, and I'll repeat it again. So it's Religion and Sustainability, Interreligious Resources, Interdisciplinary Responses, and in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals series.
So I'm going to screen share the GTU Sustainability 360 websites web page is what I'm doing. And in fact, I should probably just show you this web page really quickly. Here's the book. It's part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal Publishers Compact book series. And what's interesting about this book is the number of national, international, and consortial voices, including many of our faculty and alums. And there are, if we look at the book, you know, basically what you see is that there are these chapters, sections, that look at, let me show you so that I can share the information on the screen. Give me one moment while I just pull it up so that I can.
And I've been very forgetful today. So just for those of you that are here, we take questions at the end. So we just have a couple more questions. We're going to look at this, and then I have a final question for Dr. Rita, and then we'll open to Q&A. If you have questions that are coming up, bubbling up as this is happening, you're welcome to put them in the chat, and then we'll read those first.
Okay, so we have the following parts. Okay, but first of all, we make the case that religion matters to sustainability. And, you know, if I might, just very quickly, the sections are very important because we talk about it, you know, my first chapter is called Beyond the Denial of Religion and Theology as Resources, an Introduction. Today, I think it was yesterday, that my article in the Conversation magazine was published, and there were all these comments from people in Sweden and all manner of places saying, you know, religion, what is religion? And so the fact is that 80% of the world's population is religious, follows a religion. So whether we are religious or not is not the point. It's just that this is a very powerful force, and it's a force for human resilience. And it's also a force to help support the action towards climate mitigation and environmental repair and regeneration. So the parts in our book talk about interreligious hospitality. The first one is sustainable relations towards interreligious hospitality. Because if we can't talk to each other, we can't join hands in helping, to make all of these things happen. The second is economic justice. So the three pillars of sustainability is social justice, economic justice, and ecological justice and regeneration. So economic justice is a key part of the book. And then there's religious ethics for a sustainable world, embodied practices from our spiritual systems for sustainability and resilience. This is very important that, the different contemplative, liturgical, and other communitarian practices give us resilience and hope in a time where that is being crushed. Then I have a large section on global religions and worldviews, theological and philosophical insights on ecology. And then there's social justice, sustainable lives. If we don't take care of people, people will not take care of the more than human world. So we have to make sure that social justice is in place for environmental justice, ecological justice, and regeneration to flow forth. Then there's ecological praxis, intention, imagination, and contemplation. And these are about aesthetics, eco-aesthetics, geoaesthetics, and also aspirational communities. So there's a lot in here. And if I might, I'll just briefly give two sentences, I think, from my first chapter, where I talk about the need for this. The devastation of the ecosphere is inextricably linked to unsustainable economic, ecological, societal, geopolitical, cultural, and ethical perspectives. The COVID-19 global pandemic, climate calamity, mass extinctions, pollution, are diverse facets of a single cause, the extreme mal-relationship between human civilization and the ecosystems of the earth. Existence itself is in the process of being reduced to the point where commerce and consumption intersect. The ability of the human imagination to creatively absorb and be informed by wilderness, by sentience, by the cosmos is diminishing. And this diminution is evident to us very clearly in the rendition of the arts and the humanities as increasingly irrelevant. To enable the restoration and flourishing of human communities and the ecosphere, and more and new technology will be helpful but inadequate. More and better data will be useful but inadequate, because numerical computations forecasting disaster have been shown to be insufficient in the face of human denial and recalcitrance. Human societies need to be reimagined and restored and restoried in ways that acknowledge the significance of the moral, ethical, aesthetic, contemplative, spiritual dimensions of being human. And the epistemic paradigms based on radical commercialism, which led to this catastrophic era in our time, is not likely to lead to the healing of the same. New imaginaries need to arise that elicit the wonder and reverence and inspire care. Humility and gratitude, the majestic mystery of creation, is a shared element across diverse religious traditions. There's a lot in our spiritual traditions. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, and that brings us into our into my final question, which is if you could talk to us a bit about how you see ecological feminism as it pertains to the divine feminine.
So a disclosure, I'm ordained and have initiation into a Hindu lineage, a yogic lineage of the divine feminine. My guru was a woman guru. She was a yogini in a very long, centuries long lineage of women spiritual leaders in this theological lineage of the divine feminine known as Shakti, Mahadevi, and I will stay with Shakti, which means force, power, capacity. So we're talking about divine force, power, capacity. And the idea of sacred immanence, the affirmation of the force and presence of supreme reality in every dimension of the manifest universe is powerfully present and expressed in Shakta theology and is the hallmark of Shaktism, the theology of the divine feminine. The models of the divine feminine represented by Shakta strains in Hindu theology expand the role of the divine feminine and associated the divine feminine principle with transcendence as well as immanence. But even that transcendence is immanent within us, our capacity to self-transcend. It is, however, an emphasis on the sacred nature of this world and the valorization of sentience, of embodiment, and of the elemental nature on earth that especially distinguishes Shakta theology. And so that she doesn't create the world, she transforms into the world. She is the consciousness within the matter energy continuum, and she is continuum. She is the creator, she is the creation, she's the process of creativity. And yet, there's a very strong theodicy within this system that says that she seeks the flourishing of her creation, of her transformation, and experiences through our senses, through the senses of sentient beings, all that the earth has to give. Let that experience be beautiful. That's what we say. And my book that's coming out on this is called Radical Divine Immanence, an Emancipatory Ecological Hindu Theology of the Divine Feminine. And the difference between this theology and other theologies within my tradition, as well as other traditions that I've studied that have a strong immanental aspect, is that the divine is in matter itself. That changes everything. That means our bodies are sacred. That means the specific bodies of people who are oppressed are sacred. That means it's not just that our soul is holy, our embodiment, our senses, our emotions, our feelings are holy. And that paying attention to that as she is experiencing that through us is a contemplative practice.
Thank you so much. So much wisdom in just a half an hour. You've covered so much material. I know that there must be questions. I want to just thank you again for taking the time. I know that you're very busy, and it's just been such a wonderful, wonderful conversation. What a wonderful way to have a Friday afternoon. I'm going to open it up for questions if there's anyone. I put in the link to the 360 project also. And if there are any other links that you'd like to share with us, please do put in the link. Is there anyone that would like to ask a question? Is that, I see Angela and Kiana.
Go ahead, Kiana.
Thank you. Dr. Sherma, I'm really interested in just reading and learning more about your specific tradition and being initiated to Shakti. So do you have any articles or journals or books that you would recommend that I can, so I may read upon it?
Yes, I can. I think that the best thing to do is go to academia.edu and look me up. There's several articles there.
Dr. Rita might be frozen. Okay, there you're good.
Including, I think, and then there's my Kiana, just get in touch with me. I'll send them to you.
Thank you. Okay, I will do. Thank you.
But for those of you who are not familiar with me and who are interested in this, I'm on academia, and these articles are there, both on ecological feminism and on the divine feminine. Angela?
Yeah, I'm new to this field. Thank you. That was really moving. From my work as a grant writer in the past, I'm familiar with the UN sustainability goals. Could you give us examples of interreligious feminist collaboration with everyday groups, grassroots groups on the planet right now, models that we might look to?
I am just trying to find the one that I'm involved in. And I don't think that they put it on. There is a group. There's several groups actually. Transforming, if you go to ResearchGate, I'll give you this article. This is helpful. I gave this to my students last year. So let me just put this in chat. This might be helpful.
And also, if you could put your academia link in the chat so that others can find the other articles you were mentioning.
Do that.
Great.
Dr. Rita, to echo Angela's question while you're putting that information in the chat, can you give us an idea of what you see as benefits and strengths of being part of interreligious networks such as you are?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I would say that from, there's several things. There are several reasons why it's beneficial. First of all, we learn from each other. Right? So that you might be using a method that I hadn't thought about. I might have an approach that you hadn't thought about. And we benefit each other. We teach each other new ways of seeing things and new tools for handling the crisis. That's one reason. The second reason is that it gives us strength, so that because dealing with social justice, environmental justice, ecological justice and regeneration. And I say ecological justice, I just recently, I'm in the snippet of a video on sacred rivers across the world, India, Africa, New Zealand, all over the place. And it's very interesting because there are now dozens of rivers across the planet which have the status of having rights. So this idea of not environmental rights, but of ecological rights and justice to ecosystems, to elements of the ecosystem, that needs an international voice. So that, remember when we had the Dakota Access Pipeline, Indigenous women leaders were at the forefront of it. And feminist leaders across the world, in Africa and India, Europe and Australia, came together. Australian Aboriginal leaders, women leaders, came together to support them, that put a spotlight on, the call of the Indigenous women leaders here, so that then it becomes, a global strength. And the interreligious strength is extremely important, because one of the issues with patriarchy is the issue of triumphalism, right? And triumphalism is what creates conflicts between religions. And that's why the first section of my book, to which Dr. Miles Tribble has also contributed a brilliant chapter. That first section is about spiritual hospitality, because we can do so much together if we break down triumphalism. And triumphalism can be subtle, or it can be overt, explicit, and lead to colonialism, genocide, slavery, and you know the rest. So when we work interreligiously, women working interreligiously is a very powerful thing. So thank you for bringing that up, Dr. Malmström.
Do we have anyone else have questions? Yes, William.
It's not a question, it's just a gratitude. Very grateful for the wide braided together context and your presence and the cadence of your words. Your presentation just shimmered through Zoom, which is not easy to do.
Thank you, William. I'm grateful that you're here. Ayanna?
Hello, I'm in the car, so I hope it's not too much of a background noise.
No.
But what I wanted to say was I was really grateful to hear you articulate that ecofeminism and, by extension, eco-womanism and others are not just theoretical. They are practical and praxis oriented, in the ways that they impact people, particularly, the most marginalized among us, are in practical ways, right? So it's not just,
We've lost you, Ayanna.
Oh, that's too bad. She's very exciting to listen to.
Angela, did you have a oh wait, we've got you back.
Oh, no, I'm driving. I'm sorry. I just was grateful. I'm not going to go on too long, but I was just grateful for you, Dr. Sherma, for bringing up the practical implications of this intersecting and parallel system of oppressions, the oppression of the earth and the oppression of bodies, and the ways that it impacts marginalized women, and particularly women of color, much more so than any other demographic, literally in terms of where we are located and situated and railroaded in terms of housing and healthcare and quality of life and so on and so forth. And Dr. Melanie Harris, she calls it a logic of domination that governs this parallel system of oppressions. And you mirror it, obviously so well and so much and so deeply in your words. And so I'm just so grateful, because to move it out of theory into praxis is just what I'm deeply passionate about, and giving voice to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Ayanna. I also want to talk about a little bit about this whole issue of environmental justice. When we think of environmental justice, what happens is that we think of Flint, Michigan, people suffering and so forth. But environmental justice affects women and children in a very profound way, and children in utero in very powerful ways. And so the thing is that natal women who have breasts and uteruses, that, pathology. Okay, my cousin is he's the president of the International Pathological Association. So whether I want to or not, I hear a lot of pathology talk from him. And what I learned from him that these chemicals that accrue in our water and in our air and in the lead in our buildings and the toxic chemicals that release them from poorly maintained buildings, all of which happens and occurs daily in the poorest neighborhoods. They accrue in breast tissue and they accrue in women's reproductive organs and cause reproductive and breast cancers at a much higher rate than in healthy suburban areas or exurban and whatever. And so when we talk about environmental justice, of course, everybody has a body and everybody's suffering, but it's really remarkable how women suffer for this in a much more visceral way, natal women, and those who carry children. In utero, children are affected by this very strongly. These pollutants, toxic elements that are in the air, the water, and all of their surroundings. So ecological feminism is not a theory. It is very much based in the embodied experience of individual people. And this is not an accident that these women are experiencing this. That is the tragedy. So when we, what attracted me, to go back to Dr. Miles Tribble's question about what happens when women work together interreligiously. Let me give you an example. So when I was in graduate school, I did my master's and my PhD at Claremont Graduate University, the Graduate University of the Claremont Colleges near Los Angeles. And I came across ecological feminism, and I came across womanism, and one of my mentors was a womanist scholar. I came across Black liberation theology. I came across queer theology, and I came across ecological liberation theology. And, I did a very large number, in fact, almost all my coursework was in Christian studies because I had that in the background. And so what happened in the process is that my eyes became open to my sisters of other traditions and other races and other cultures and ethnicities, and their theories that are arising from their spaces. And that, first of all, transformed my vision of how, my lens on the world. It transformed also, and this is the interesting part, it transformed my hermeneutics on my own tradition. So while I don't do comparative work, the dialogue of these traditions and these voices are in my head and my body, when I engage my own texts and theologies and traditions. I begin to see where the emancipatory strings and liberative threads are, and I begin to weave them together. And this is the gift of working together. You begin to see things in your own tradition that you didn't think of, you wouldn't have thought of. So that's, I think that's a gift. Angela,
do you have a follow-up? You're muted, Angela.
I have a different question, but I'm glad to yield also if there's someone else. So in the US, I associate eco-hostility with white, often patriarchal and supremacist Christianity. And I was wondering if you see different ecological positions in the global South in Christianity. You know, Christianity is, you know, Latin American, it's African, it's Asian. So I was wondering if you see different patterns.
So I've learned a lot from my own students. And I've had students from the Global South ever since I started teaching. When I was at USC, I'd have classes of, I'd teach 200 students a week. And many of them were they weren't American Hispanic, they were from Latin America. They were international students from Latin America or Mexico or Africa and Asia. And I learned so much from them because it's very interesting that where is the majority of Christians today? In the Global South. And so it was very interesting to talk to, Kiana will remember this. We had a student in a class I gave last semester called Ecology, Equity, Worldviews, Ecology, and Equity. And we had two African students, one of whom was joining us from Zimbabwe. And so it was quite late for him. And we had, one of our students, Emmanuel, talked about the burial systems in traditional indigenous African religion. And he's a Jesuit, but that his community there will use a burial system where you wrap someone in a cloth that, is biodegradable and that disintegrates into the ground. And then the person is returned to the soil from which they arose. And they haven't taken, we even have coffins here made of steel. Like, what for, So, people are so attached to their corpses. Think about it. It's ridiculous. And so this is like a small example, but it's really not. It's emblematic of an entire perspective. And from the global South, we're talking about South America, for example. I've had lots of students from South America, including at GTU. I've had several students in GTU who took my decoloniality classes. And it's very interesting because I came across the work of decoloniality scholars, or it originated in the work of Latin American scholars. And so their entire perspective, they don't even like the word Anthropocene. So we talk about now in the Anthropocene, we have this going on and that. No, they say just the fact that you have now claimed this era, and then saying, yes, it's our era and we kind of messed it up. This is not appropriate. Let us give this era back to the earth, which it, where it belongs, and let us pull ourselves out of it. Non-Anthropocene is where we need to get to. So they have a term, cosmovision, which in English we translate as cosmovision, much less poetically. And it gives us a sense not just of, kind of a philosophy of environmental conservation, which has a history of ethnic cleansing and really horrific history. It's a very different approach. It's an approach where the human and the non-human interact, intersect, and are interdependent. So this is coming out of the Latin American idea of the pluriverse and so forth. But if you look at our own Indigenous First Nations, look at the city of Oakland. It's called Oakland because there were so many California live oaks, right? And they were husbanded, they were planted, they were looked after by individuals who were from these First Nations. They used the acorns for food, and they also did occasional burning, and they did hunting in these forests. And so this idea that the human must be removed for the environment to be all right goes against the experience of women's embodiment. That if you look across the global south, first of all, women can't really remove themselves. They can't forget their embodiment. We are biologically created in a certain way. And if you look at the global south in particular, as you brought it up, women are the ones who go gathering water, who go gathering firewood, who go do the horticulture outside. And so they have in very direct relationship with the environment. So the UN has found, and if you can bring, that's why the Sustainable Development Goal 5 is about women and girls, empowering them, not only for their sake, of course, that's important, but it also alters the way that terrain and environments are affected if you educate them on, their impact on it.
Thank you so much. Such powerful discussion, so important and so powerful. So much learning. I'm gonna have to watch this all over again after it's posted on our YouTube link. And I'm so the GTU is so lucky to have you as a resource. I do hope that you'll look to the links for those that you're here in attendance. We do have a few more minutes, so if there are any other questions, we probably have time for one final question. What you were just mentioning, I work with a community organizing group called True North here. I'm in Northern California, in Humboldt County, and there's been a lot of returning of the land to different indigenous tribes here that have been continuing to care for the land in a way that has really protected us in different areas from the fires through doing intentional burns and returning that held wisdom and connection to the land in a way that I wish would be done all through California, because it's I've really felt that protection that the Wiyot tribe and others that are here have really been giving to this county, and have really, I'm grateful for being held in those continued practices. And to me, it's just such a juxtaposition to then when we look at this, billionaire space race, right, that we're in. So, this who's really turned back to the land and is trying to heal, and then who's just trying to escape, and how that economically, where the money who gets supported in that. So we're really not investing within healing communities, and in fact, often just continuing to take from those communities, and then allowing for the kind of pillaging through these corporations that often have more rights than many people, and how that is funding this kind of space race, and this it's creating this firm dichotomy. And so I'm just wondering, as you've been doing work with the United Nations and things like that, how are you seeing kind of these larger communities? We talked about interreligious dialogue, but then how are you seeing kind of these socioeconomic aspects play out in who's tending and caring, who's prioritizing healing, and then and the perceptions around these that actually have power and money, and where they're directing it.
So, the problem is that when you said that, I thought of, we just did a GTUX original on eco-spirituality, and I talked about this, and there's a video and it shows Mars. Like, this is their idea, and they're now thinking of a corporate takeover of the moon. I just read that today, and it's stunning, the kind of things that they come up with. The UN, the problem is that the international legal instruments and international organizations are not beholden, but are constrained by forums like the World Economic Forum, the World Trade Association, International Monetary Fund. All of these were meant to benefit poor people across the planet, and poor nations and poor regions. And the question is, were they poor before colonization? And the answer is inevitably no. So now these nations are asking for reparations, because a lot of the corporations, that something like Coca-Cola will go to Mexico or will go to India, will soak up the entire groundwater, will completely deplete the groundwater of an entire region, or another corporation will come and pollute, the waters off a river, that millions of people depend on. So the corporate responsibility has to be accounted for, because if we don't account for that, and they're not held accountable for the vicious ways that they treat lands and peoples and other species, we will not be able to recover from this disaster, but it'll just go on. And it becomes a threat to our very civilization and to our very species eventually. So the question is how, and of course the answer is very clear, that you put a wealth tax. You don't allow the accumulation of capital in, like a lineage or something, that is very feudal. That's what they did during the feudal era. And, you have all the peasants, and then you have a few, masters, right? So we're kind of in a latter-day feudalism. And we don't have the political will, because, corporations, not just in the United States, but all over the world, essentially buy up political parties, and the ones they can't buy, they kind of pocket them by spreading disinformation about them. And so we're in a situation that is utterly dangerous and headed towards oligarchy. And if there isn't a kind of a global effort towards basic, like a wealth tax, like allowing for zero corporate tax, things like that, that should be no-brainers, right? Instead, they're non sequiturs, because the companies are funding half the government, half the politicians.
Thank you so much. And yes, even within California, we've been in a historic drought, and there have been companies that have been bottling water from within our state, and that's in the U.S. So even in California, which is supposed to be one of the most progressive states, we've still allowed corporations to be taking a vital resource in a time of drought for years. So this just shows that even we can't even assume that that states that state that they have a proclaimed interest in these issues are even doing what they need to do, let alone a kind of even wider networks. Thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful event. We're so lucky to have you, Dr. Rita, and this event will be